Bill Maher thought he could land a quick jab and move on, but Pam Bondi's razor-sharp response flipped the real-time stage and sent shockwaves across the internet. The green room at CBS Television City in Los Angeles was sterile, its walls too white, its chairs too stiff, like it was built for waiting. Not thinking, Pam Bondi sat alone, her phone dim in her hand. Notes for the night's real time with Bill Maher. Panel open on the screen. A production assistant had just ducked out, muttering. She had 10 minutes before Air Bondi's face stayed calm, but her instincts were sharp. Something about this felt loaded. Her media strategist had warned her 2 days prior. They're pitching it as a talk on legal accountability, he'd said. But Maher's people were sigh about the setup. They might try to corner you. Stay ready. Bondi hadn't reacted much. She'd faced tougher courtrooms where every word was a weapon, press briefings where questions hid agendas. As Florida's former attorney general, she knew how to spot a trap. Still, the vibe when she arrived was off. No small talk, no introductions, just staff who avoided her gaze. Her assistant Claire slipped in. 2 minutes, she whispered. Bondi stood, smoothed her navy blazer sharp, no frills, and checked the mirror. No cracks, no doubt. She walked toward the set, passing a wall of black and white photos, pundits' comics' faces, who never had to justify their place in a room. The air felt heavy, like the stage was already set before she stepped on it. Bill Maher greeted her with a quick nod and a half-smile, pointing to her seat. The other guest, a liberal law professor, gave a curt glance. The light snapped on. The applause sign blinked, the theme music blared, and they were live. Maher leaned in, his grin sly. Tonight, we've got Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General known for tough prosecutions, and a flair for the political stage. The audience chuckled lightly, sensing an edge. Bondi sat composed, legs crossed. Hands folded, her expression steady. Good to be here, she said, voice clear. Ma didn't wait. Pam, we're diving into legal accountability. You've got a long record, but critics say you're more about sound bites than substance. A politician playing lawyer. How do you answer that? The jab was smooth, wrapped in a smirk designed to draw laughs, not thought. A few in the crowd tittered, expecting a stumble. Bondi didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly, eyes locked on Maher, not in anger, but in quiet calculation. The room stilled, the air taut with anticipation. What she said next wasn't loud or fiery. It was precise, cutting, and far more dangerous than anyone expected from the woman they'd underestimated. Pam Bondi sat steady under the real-time studio lights. Bill Maher's jab about her being a politician in a lawyer's suit still hanging in the air. The audience's soft chuckles faded, their eyes on her, waiting for a flinch that never came. Maher's smirk lingered, expecting a defensive retort. Instead, Bondi leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but edged with steel, ready to redirect the conversation. Bill, if we're talking accountability, let's start with facts, she said. Her tone measured. I spent 20 years as a prosecutor, putting away violent offenders, not chasing headlines. My record, thousands of cases from murder to fraud, stands on results, not sound bites. The room hushed, the crowd feeling a change. But since you mentioned substance, let's talk about legal accountability where it counts, making sure laws work for people, not egos. Maher arched an eyebrow, surprised by her shift. Fair enough, he said, quickly regrouping. But your political connections, particularly in Florida, lead folks to wonder whether your legal work was about justice or simply climbing the ladder. That's the impression, right? The question was bait, intended to make her seem opportunistic. Several in the crowd grumbled, not sure where this was headed. Bondi did not bite. Perception isn't evidence, she responded, her voice unwavering. As Attorney General, I prosecuted human trafficking and opioid abuse cases that didn't make splashy headlines but saved lives. If that's climbing, it's toward justice, not a camera flash. She locked eyes with Maher. The question is why critics are attacking my politics rather than my record. That's not holding someone accountable, it's distracting. The crowd rustled, some nodding, others whispering. Maher shifted in his seat, his smile wavering. Okay, but let's consider the legal side, he said, attempting to reclaim. You've represented some unpopular individuals? Doesn't that muddy the waters between law and politics? The barb was pointed now, suggesting her legal integrity was questionable. Bondi's answer was precise. Every defendant is entitled to counsel. That's the Constitution, not politics. In Gideon versus Wayite, the Supreme Court ensured that, right? Because justice isn't playing favorites, it's process. She leaned forward slightly. If we only represent the popular, we're not attorneys, we're cheerleaders. I'd rather defend the system than play to a crowd. The professor, sitting beside her quiet, until now nodded, subtly impressed. The crowd erupted into scattered applause, not loud but sincere feeling. Bondi's authority mayor reached for his water, his rhythm broken. That's a good principle, he said. But practically, don't you take cases that fit your politics? Bondi's eyes didn't waver. I pick cases based on law, not loyalty. When I prosecuted corruption, it didn't matter if the defendant was a friend or foe. Evidence did. She cited a case from her tenure, a public official convicted despite political pressure. That's accountability, Bill. Judging me by who I defend instead of what I've done. That's just lazy. The room felt different now, the air charged with her clarity. Maher tried to pivot. Let's broaden this. The justice system itself, don't you think it's too politicized today? The question was a lifeline, a chance to move past the personal, but Bondi wasn't letting him off that easy. She smiled faintly, not in warmth, but in control. If we're talking politicization, let's start with why people assume a woman who's fought in court for decades is just a politician. That's where the real bias lies. The line landed like a blade, quiet but piercing, and the audience gasped. Sensing Mayer was about to face a reckoning, the real-time studio crackled with tension as Pam Bondi's pointed remark about bias hung in the air. The audience's gasps giving way to a charged silence. Bill Maher caught off balance by her accusation that assumptions about her as a woman fueled criticism, gripped his notes. His smirk replaced by a flicker of unease. The crowd, sensing a shift, leaned in, while the law professor beside Bondi sat still, eyes darting between them. Mayer leaned back, forcing a chuckle. Bias, come on, Pam, that's a bit of a stretch, he said, his tone patronizing. I'm not questioning your record because you're a woman. I'm questioning it because you've played the political game. People see you at rallies, not law libraries. The jab was deliberate, framing her as a performer, not a legal mind. A few in the audience tittered, but most stayed quiet, waiting. Bondi's expression didn't shift. She looked at Mayer, her gaze steady, like she was sizing up a witness on the stand. Bill, you just proved my point, she said, her voice low but sharp. You assume I'm at rallies instead of libraries because that fits a story you've already written about me. I've argued cases before the Supreme Court dismantled trafficking rings and prosecuted corruption. But you'd rather talk about my photo ops than my precedents. Why is that? The room froze. The audience didn't clap, didn't laugh, they held their breath. Bondi's words weren't loud, but they cut through the studio's polished veneer, exposing Mayer's tactic. The professor nodded slightly, a rare sign of respect. Mayer shifted his fingers, tapping the desk. I'm just saying what people think, he said, doubling down. Your public image screams politics, isn't that on you? Bondi didn't blink. No, it's on people who judge a lawyer's career by her visibility instead of her verdicts. She leaned forward, her voice steady. When I was Attorney General, I led a task force that convicted over 100 traffickers. That's not a photo op, that's evidence. In court, we don't win by being loud, we win by being right. Maybe you're confusing the two. A woman in the crowd let out a soft yes, sparking murmurs of agreement. The camera lingered on Maher, his jaw tight. He tried to pivot. Okay, let's talk law then. You've backed some tough on crime policies. Don't they often hit marginalized groups hardest? The question was a trap meant to paint her as callous. Bondi saw it coming. Tough on crime doesn't mean blind to fairness, she said. In Florida, I pushed for diversion programs for nonviolent offenders. Over 10,000 people got second chances instead of jail time. That's not politics, that's policy. She cited a case, United States versus Booker, to ground her point. The Supreme Court gave judges discretion in sentencing to avoid disproportionate outcomes. My policies followed that principle. Data, not dogma. The audience broke into applause, stronger now, drawn to her clarity. The professor, unable to stay silent, chimed in. She's right about Booker, he said, nodding. Meyer's eyes narrowed, his control slipping. Fine, you know your law, he said. His tone clipped. But let's be real. Your public persona, your ties to certain figures, that's what people see. How do you expect them to take you seriously as a neutral legal voice? Bondi's response was a blade. I expect people to judge me by my work, not their assumptions. You keep circling my persona. Bill, but you haven't challenged a single case I've won. If you want to talk law, I'm here. If you want to talk image, that's your stage, not mine. The line landed like a gavel, and the room erupted. Half the crowd clapping, the other half stunned as Maher faced a challenge he hadn't anticipated. The real-time studio pulsed with energy as Pam Bondi's sharp rebuke, calling out Bill Maher for fixating on her image rather than her legal record, ignited the audience. The applause, a mix of admiration and shock, faded into a tense hush. Maher, his composure fraying, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he tried to reclaim the narrative. The law professor, now a quiet observer, watched closely, while the crowd sensed the exchange was about to escalate. Maher forced a grin. All right, Pam, you're here for law, not image, fair point, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But let's discuss big picture. The justice system you defend, it's a mess, right? Over-incarceration, racial disparities, and you've supported policies that critics say exacerbate those issues. How do you reconcile that with your evidence-based approach? The question was broad, a political grenade designed to catch her off guard. Bondi didn't flinch. She shifted slightly toward the audience, her voice steady but authoritative. The system isn't perfect, but characterizing it as a monolith is lazy, she said. As a prosecutor, I saw the imperfections up close. Overcrowded jails, shattered families. That's why I advocated for reforms like drug courts and mental health diversions, which reduced recidivism by 15% in Florida. She referenced a study by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, her accuracy disarming critics, cherry-pick policies to advance a narrative, but they omit the part where I lowered sentences for nonviolent offenses. That's the work, messy not messy headlines. The crowd murmured in agreement, some applauding softly. Mere sensing the pivot, adjusted. Sure. But your tough-on-crime image doesn't shout reform. It shouts politics, particularly when you partner with figures who advocate for tougher laws. The jab was personal, linking her to contentious allies, and the audience braced for a fiery retort. Bondi's reply was chilling, delivered with cold clarity. Bill, you're doing it again. Judging me by who you believe, I know not what I've done. I've spent decades in courtrooms, not campaign trails, constructing cases on evidence, not alliances. If you want to discuss policy, name a law I've supported. That's unfair. I'll wait. She paused, her eyes locked on his, the silence oppressive. The audience gasped, then erupted in applause louder now as Meyer's smirk disappeared. He scrambled. I'm not saying you personally. Look, it's the system. People view you as part of that tough-on-crime. Wave. Bondi interrupted, her voice steady. People see what they're told to see. I prosecuted rapists and traffickers to safeguard communities, not to gain votes. And when I advocated for reform, it was because the data demonstrated it worked, not because it sounded good. That's the difference between law and your show. Facts over feelings. The room erupted, cheers commingling with stunned laughter. A woman in the back yelled, "Get him!" The professor, breaking protocol, clapped briefly, a rare nod. Maher raised a hand, trying to quell the crowd. Okay, let's calm down, he said, his voice tight. He reached for his notes, but his hands fumbled, betraying his rattled state. Let's switch gears. What's your take on the broader politicization of law today? Bondi didn't let him escape. The politicization starts when people like you reduce a lawyer's career to a caricature, she said, her tone unyielding. You've spent this whole segment dodging my record to talk about perceptions. If you want to fix the system, start by listening to the people who've actually fought in it. Not just the ones who make good TV, The line was a blade clean and final, and the audience roared, some standing, as clips of the moment began trending online in real time. The real-time studio was still buzzing as the segment ended. Pam Bondi's final piercing line accusing Bill Maher of reducing her career to a caricature echoing in the air. The audience's roar, a mix of cheers and stunned gasps, lingered as the cameras cut to commercial. Marv forced a tight smile, muttering, "Good stuff." But his eyes betrayed unease. Bondi sat back, adjusting her blazer, her calm unshaken. The law professor gave her a nod, a silent salute, as the stage lights dimmed. Back in the green room, Bondi's assistant Claire burst in, phone in hand. "You're blowing up online," she said, eyes wide. "#1 on X already clips. Everywhere." Bondi peeled off her mic, exhaling. "They'll spin it," she said, handing Claire the phone. She wasn't wrong. Within minutes, 15-second snippets of her facts over feelings line looped across social media, layered with captions like "Bondi burns," "Maher," and savage takedown gifts of her cool stare went viral, paired with dramatic music or bold text. "Don't try her." The show's staff offered no post-show chat, just a curt, "You're clear," from an assistant. Bondi didn't linger in the car to her hotel. Her phone buzzed nonstop, texts from colleagues, friends, even a former judge. "You dismantled him." Her sister sent mom's proud, "You didn't let him play you." But the headlines were already twisting. One read, "Bondi clashes with Ma in fiery exchange," as if she'd shouted, "Another former AG goes off on live TV." Bondi shook her head. "Goes off," she muttered. "I barely raised my voice." By morning, the narrative split. Cable news panels debated her tone, not her points. A conservative pundit called her a lion, while a liberal host sniffed, she was aggressive, not constructive. Online, the reaction was louder. A tweet from a law student in Miami went viral. "Pam Bondi just showed how to shut down bias without blinking." Study that a single mom from Orlando posted. "She spoke like someone who's been underestimated her whole life." I felt that these quieter voices, not the memes, hit Bondi hardest when Claire showed her the posts. Her inbox overflowed with interview requests. CNN, MSNBC, even international outlets. A producer from The View called, but Bondi waved it off. They want the viral moment, not the law. She told Claire, a DC strategist phoned praising her, but warning, "The press will eat this up, then spit you out, stay focused." Bondi nodded, already thinking past the noise. She hadn't come to Maher's stage for applause, she'd come to talk justice. Yet, the backlash brewed. A columnist dubbed her combative, implying she'd alienated viewers. A progressive blog called her comeback performative, ignoring her policy points. On X, trolls flooded her mentions, some mocking her appearance, others her politics. But the support was fierce too. A retired prosecutor tweeted, "I've seen Bondi in court, Maher didn't stand a 12 chance." A young lawyer in Chicago posted a clip with, "This is how you own a room, respect." Bondi stayed quiet, declining interviews. She met with her team, focusing on her next case, not the headlines. At a community event in Tampa, a woman approached her, voice low. "I've been talked over in meetings for years," she said. "Watching you made me feel seen." That not the trending hashtags was why Bondi kept going. The viral storm would fade, but the clarity she'd shown would linger. A spark for those watching from the shadows. The viral storm around Pam Bondi's real-time clash with Bill Maher began to quiet. The internet's attention shifting to fresh scandals and sound bites. But the impact of her calm, cutting comeback, calling out Maher's bias without raising her voice, left a deeper mark, rippling through conversations far beyond the studio. Bondi's words, now etched in clips and quotes, became a touchstone for those who'd felt dismissed or misjudged. Weeks later, Bondi sat in her Tampa office, the morning sun filtering through blinds. Her desk held case files, not news clippings. She'd ignored most interview requests, letting the headlines, "Bondi schools, Maher TV take-own goes viral" fade. Her focus was on work, a pro bono case for trafficking victims. Yet the moment on Maher's stage followed her not as noise, but as a quiet shift in how people saw her and how they saw themselves. Social media had cooled, but the personal stories kept coming. A law student in Atlanta emailed, "I rewatched your segment before a mock trial. You showed me how to stay steady under pressure." A paralegal in Jacksonville left a voicemail. "I've been underestimated my whole career. You made me want to speak up." These weren't viral posts. They were private, raw, and they grounded Bondi more than any trending hashtag could. The legal world took notice too. A bar association invited her to keynote a conference on women in law, citing her commanding presence. A Supreme Court advocate, once skeptical of her, called to collaborate on a case. Bondi accepted the invite, selectively, always redirecting to policy, sentencing, reform, victim, advocacy, not the TV moment. She knew the spotlight was fleeting, but the principles she'd defended weren't. Backlash persisted, though softer now. A pundit on cable called her too confrontational, missing her restraint online. A few critics labeled her arrogant, twisting her clarity into ego. Bondi shrugged it off, but it stung when a colleague, an older male attorney, suggested she tone it down to avoid alienating allies. She smiled thinly and said, "I'll stick with being clear." That was the lesson. Clarity wasn't loud, but it was powerful. At a Miami high school, speaking to a civics class, Bondi saw her impact firsthand. A girl, maybe 16, raised her hand. "How do you talk when people don't take you seriously?" Bondi paused, then said, "You don't wait for their permission. You speak from what you know, not what they expect." The girl scribbled it down, her face lit with purpose. Later, she showed Bondi a notebook with facts over feelings written in marker. A quiet nod to the viral line. That phrase, "facts over feelings," became a mantra for some. A teacher in Phoenix played the clip in class, not for politics, but to show how to challenge bias without rancor. A nurse in Dallas told Bondi at a fundraiser, "I used your line in a staff meeting when my boss dismissed me. It worked." These moments, small but seismic, showed why the exchange mattered, not for the applause but for the permission it gave others to stand firm. Bondi's story wasn't about winning a debate, it was about refusing to be reduced. In a world hooked on shouting matches, her composure was radical. She didn't need to yell to be heard, didn't need to shrink to be respected. For every woman told she's too much, every lawyer judged by optics, every voice nudged to soften, Bondi's moment was a blueprint. You can be sharp, unapologetic, and still in control. So if you're watching, think about your own rooms where you've been talked over, underestimated, or asked to smile through dismissal. What would shift if you spoke like Bondi? Not with fire, but with facts. Not to win, but to be whole. Share this story with someone who needs that spark. Subscribe for more tales of clarity cutting through chaos. And let's keep talking about what it means to stand tall without shouting.